يا يحيى خذ الكتاب بقوة وآتيناه الحكم صبيا إذ قال الله يا عيسى إني متوفيك ورافعك إلي محمد رسول الله.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهديه الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Surah Yusuf is a surah that has great benefits for each and every one of us to learn how to conduct our life, to be obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to witness the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to see the outcome of one's good actions. That good deeds, when it's done sincerely for the sake of Allah, following the truth, following the way of the Prophet ﷺ, the outcome is definitely what is best. Even if a person faces some types of trials or difficulties, but the outcome, the end of all things is definitely what is best for the believers. And if a person is in haste to fulfill his desire, to not to face the trials in the proper way, he might enjoy some temporary enjoyment in his life, but the outcome, the end of his affairs is always regret. Even if he repented to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one of the conditions of repentance is an-nadam, or to regret the sin. And if a person doesn't and he faces the punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what a worse situation that is. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us always among those who benefit from the book of Allah and steadfast, and to be steadfast upon the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As mentioned before, Surah Yusuf is about the story of Yusuf alayhi salam. But it's not intended for us to talk about the story of Yusuf alayhi salam as a story, but rather we go through what's mentioned in the verses of the Qur'an. So we're going verse by verse, regardless of the story as a story. And that's why we want to make sure that things are not out of context of how the verses are situated, the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed it to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Inshallah ta'ala we'll go through verses number 25 to 29. 25 to 29 from Surah Yusuf. And before we start, these verses are in the context when Yusuf alayhi salam was faced by the wife of Al-Aziz, when she tried to seduce Yusuf alayhi salam, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him steadfastness, and he did not fell into that trap of disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the details of that is still mentioned, and the plot that the wife of Al-Aziz did to Yusuf alayhi salam is mentioned in these verses. So let's start inshallah ta'ala with verse number 25. Verse number 25, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, واستبق الباب وقدت قميصه من دبر وألفيا سيدها لدى الباب قالت ما جزاء من أراد بأهلك سوءا إلا أن يسجن أو عذاب أليم. Which means, and they both raced to the door, and she tore his shirt from the back, and they found her husband at the door. She said, what is the recompense of one who intended evil for your wife, but that he be imprisoned or a painful punishment? وَاسْتَبَقَ الْبَابِ, that means they both raced. And istabaqa is in the dual tense. Istabaqa, both of them. And the istibaq is when someone is in a race. When people are racing, that means one wants to beat the other. And that comes after the ayah that she tried to get Yusuf alayhi salam to commit the sin, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected him. So what's not mentioned within these verses is for us to pay attention to, of course, but it's not that significant. So it shows that something happened, and as a result of that, Yusuf alayhi salam, after he refused to fall into the sin, he turned around and he fleeing, racing to the door. As mentioned before, the doors were locked. So as some said, they're racing to the door. Yusuf alayhi salam is racing to the door to open it, and she's racing to the door to lock it. So وَاسْتَبَقَ الْبَابِ, and that's what the meaning of istabaqa, that they were racing both to the bab, to the door. وَقَدَّتْ قَمِيصَهُ مِنْ دُبُرٍ. So Yusuf alayhi salam beat her to the door. So the last resort that she had is that she got hold of the shirt of Yusuf alayhi salam, and she tore the shirt of Yusuf alayhi salam from the back because she's behind him. وَقَدَّتْ قَمِيصَهُ مِنْ دُبُرٍ. So by the way, the qamis is mentioned again here. The first time the qamis is mentioned is when the brothers of Yusuf alayhi salam, they took the shirt of Yusuf alayhi salam and they made it or had blood on it to show their father that they, that Yusuf alayhi salam, the wolf ate him, to basically perfect the lie that they brought to their father. And here another time the word qamis is mentioned. Of course it's a different shirt, but how she tore his shirt from behind. وَقَدَّتْ قَمِيصَهُ مِنْ دُبُرٍ, from the back. وَأَلْفَيَ سَيِّدَهَا لَدَى الْبَابِ. And they found her sayyid by the door. Sayyidaha, or the literal meaning of sayyidaha, that means her chief, her master. But this refers to her husband. And the woman that they used to refer to the husband as the sayyid, as the master or the chief. He's the one in charge. So they found her husband right by the door. And the word alfaya in the Arabic language give the sense of the surprise connotation to it, that this is something that happened all of a sudden. While this was what happening, they saw her husband right there by the door. قالت ما جزاء من أراد بأهلك سوءا إلا أن يسجن أو عذاب أليم. She said, what the recompense, the jaza of the one that intended بأهلك, towards your family, meaning towards your wife, su'an, evil, one of two things: either to be imprisoned or to have a painful torment or punishment. You see how immediately the surprise that they received, that caused her, instead of panicking or showing any sign of that she's done something wrong, immediately she switched to be a victim. And this is one of the plots that she did, that she has the ability to change and to hide her emotions and to pretend and to lie, continuing to lie, so that she would be innocent, and she would accuse, in this case, Yusuf alayhi salam, because this is a very terrible scene for her. Her husband is catching her while in that state with Yusuf alayhi salam. So she said, قالت ما جزاء من أراد بأهلك سوء. She said to her husband, what do you think that the recompense should be for the one that intended for your wife evil? Referring to Yusuf alayhi salam, she is basically pretending to be innocent, and that Yusuf alayhi salam is the one that is trying to, or had tried to, cause harm to her by what is shown into the signs of what they're seeing. So she even suggested one of two things: either to be imprisoned or to have a painful punishment, whether it's to be lashed or to be beaten and so on. Yusuf alayhi salam, immediately when he saw this, he said, and this is in the next verse, verse number 26, قال هي راودتني عن نفسي وشهد شاهد من أهلها إن كان قميصه قد من قبل فصدقت وهو من الكاذبين. We'll continue the next verse. وإن كان قميصه قد من دبر فكذبت وهو من الصادقين. Which means that Yusuf alayhi salam, he said, it was she who sought to seduce me. And a witness from her family testified, if his shirt is torn from the front, then she has told the truth, and he is of the liars. But if his shirt is torn from the back, then she has lied, and he is of the truthful. Yusuf alayhi salam, when this clear accusation came from the mouth of the wife of Al-Aziz, when he's innocent, he said immediately, هي راودتني عن نفسي. It was she that sought to seduce me. It was said that Yusuf alayhi salam, he was not going to start to say that from the beginning. He didn't say that when they saw the husband right there, because he intended to maybe cover up for her, to be kind to her, not to expose her weakness. And this is part of Yusuf alayhi salam having the best manners, and see, he's someone that is such an honorable person that he would not expose someone's faults. But when she accused him abruptly like this and made it very clear and tried to expose Yusuf alayhi salam lying and accusing him of something that he's innocent from, then he defended himself, and he said it clearly, هي راودتني عن نفسي. It is her, the one that seduced me for myself, that means to commit the sin. In which when she accused him, she said to her husband, ما جزاء من أراد بأهلك سوءا. What is the recompense of the one that intend evil to your family? She did not say it directly or clearly. And this is, as the ulama, they say, when someone is upon evil, sometimes a person is not able to give a full lie. He would just say something in between. But Yusuf alayhi salam, he's innocent, and he said it very clearly. هي راودتني عن نفسي. She's the one that tried to seduce me. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala aided Yusuf alayhi salam, as mentioned in the verse, وَشَهِدَ شَاهِدٌ مِّنْ أَهْلِهَا. A witness from her family testified. And if someone looks into the books of tafsir, you might find more than one opinion of who is that witness. And again, as it's mentioned, this is the way that we're taken, which is the way of many of the people of knowledge. If it's not mentioned in the verses, we don't need to really know, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala left it like this. So when someone said that witness was a child that basically spoke in the cradle, referring to some weak narration from the Prophet ﷺ, or someone referred to the witness as her cousin, or the witness is, Allah knows best, a voice that came about and mentioned this. Allah knows best, but it's very obvious. It's someone that, a witness, he testified, and he is from her family. So someone that would not accuse her, someone that supposed to be on her side, someone that cares for her. So that therefore, if the testimony comes from someone that is caring for the one that is accused, and it's against him, that's a sign that this testifying or this witness is a true one. Because usually people, they would try to be on the favor of the ones that they like. So they would lie for them. So if someone, for example, is accused of stealing, and his own father or his beloved one say, yes, I saw him stealing, the testification of that loved one is a very strong one. Because usually a man like this, he would say that, no, my son didn't do anything immediately, without even getting to know the details of things. So it makes the evidence here very or clearer. وَشَهِدَ شَاهِدٌ مِّنْ أَهْلِهَا. And it becomes a statement that is always mentioned when someone brings an evidence that is very strong. Someone from the people itself, someone from those who would not lie to gain any access of any goodness whatsoever. So وَشَهِدَ شَاهِدٌ مِّنْ أَهْلِهَا. What is this, the testimony here? What's the witness here? إِنْ كَانَ قَمِيصُهُ قُدَّ مِنْ قُبُلٍ فَصَدَقَتْ وَهُوَ مِنَ الْكَاذِبِينَ. If his shirt is torn from the front, then she is truthful, and he is among the liars. If it's from the front, that means he was facing her. That means he's the one that is seeking her. وَإِنْ كَانَ قَمِيصُهُ قُدَّ مِنْ دُبُرٍ فَكَذَبَتْ وَهُوَ مِنَ الصَّادِقِينَ. But if his shirt is torn from behind, that means his back was to her. That means he is truthful and she is the lying one, accusing him in a wrong way, and he's innocent, because that means she's the one that torn his shirt. That means she's seeking him, she's going after him, and he's turned away from her. So the matter was very clear then when they saw, as it's going to mention in the next verse. That's why within these verses you'd see more than one evidence that proves that Yusuf alayhi salam was innocent. And there's nothing more perfect than the revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So then the next verse explains what they saw as a result of this witness of the one that is from her family. Verse number 28. فَلَمَّا رَأَى قَمِيصَهُ قُدَّ مِن دُبُرٍ قَالَ إِنَّهُ مِن كَيْدِكُنْ إِنَّ كَيْدَكُنَّ عَظِيمٌ. Which means, so when her husband saw his shirt torn from the back, he said, indeed, it is of the woman's plan. Indeed, your plan is great. فَلَمَّا رَأَى قَمِيصَهُ قُدَّ مِن دُبُرٍ. When he saw that the shirt has been torn from the back. Who saw the shirt torn from the back? Whether it's the witness or her husband, and they're both present, so it doesn't make a difference. So the majority say that this is the husband. When he saw this clearly, and after this testimony from this wise person made it very clear. So when they saw that the shirt has been torn from the back, min dubur, قَالَ إِنَّهُ مِن كَيْدِكُنْ. He said that this is from your kaid. And al-kaid is not a plan. Plan is such a weak word for kaid. Al-kaid is more than a plan. It's more of a plot. Something that to plan something to make someone fall into some accusation. Something that will cause harm to others. This is al-kaid. When someone has kaid towards others, that means he has some enmity and he's planning something to make his opponent fall into some form of a accusation or so, as she did to Yusuf alayhi salam. So this really, the translation is not very clear in that sense. So he said, قَالَ إِنَّهُ مِنْ كَيْدِكُنْ, that indeed this is from your kaid, this is from your plot, to accuse an innocent man, which is Yusuf alayhi salam, because she's lying after seeing the clear evidence that she is lying and Yusuf alayhi salam is truthful. Then he made a statement, إِنَّ كَيْدَكُنَّ عَظِيمٌ, indeed your plots are great, in a sense that it's not being praiseworthy, but rather that means it's something evil, that you can have a huge plan, you can have a huge plot. This is something that you're able to do and you're successful in doing. But we'll talk about what does that mean. Is that only to the wife of Al-Aziz, or this is to women in general? We'll talk about that inshallah ta'ala right after the break, so stay with us inshallah.
محمد رسول الله محمد رسول الله.
Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Welcome back. And with verse number 28 from Surah Yusuf, when they saw that the shirt of Yusuf alayhi salam was torn from the back, and that this is something that it shows the plot of the wife of Yusuf, or the wife of Al-Aziz. فَلَمَّا رَأَ قَمِيصَهُ قُدَّ مِن دُبُرٍ قَالَ إِنَّهُ مِن كَيْدِكُنْ, that her husband said that this is from your kaid, this is from your plot. And as we said, the kaid is when a person plans against someone, there is an enemy, for example, to him, and he's plotting something against him. And then he said, إِنَّ كَيْدَكُنَّ عَظِيمٌ. This becomes also a statement that many people, they accuse women with plotting and doing things in a concealed way to cause harm to others, and they would take this as an evidence. This is not true, and it should not be taken as evidence. But some of the women, yes, they have this ability in which they would plot against others, whether it's because of the ghayra or jealousy or competition between one another, and they would have their ways, one of which is they would use their weaknesses, they would use tears sometimes, or crying or weeping or loud voice or things of that nature. And this is with regards to men, for example. The kaid or the plots of women are far more in that sense. You know, they have the ability to do so, many of them of course. But if the woman is righteous, she's away from that. So this is what it meant here, that when he saw that, he said, إِنَّ كَيْدَكُنَّ عَظِيمٌ, that if they want something, they would, sometimes they would not go straight forward to it, but they would try to plot or plan something so that they would achieve their goal. Then after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned about what the husband of the woman said, or the witness said in the next verse, when he said in verse number 29, يُوسُفُ أَعْرِضْ عَنْ هَذَا وَاسْتَغْفِرِي لِذَنْبِكِ إِنَّكِ كُنْتِ مِنَ الْخَاطِئِينَ, which means, Yusuf, ignore this, and my wife, ask forgiveness for your sin, indeed you were of the sinful. So Yusuf أعرض عن هذا, he said, Yusuf أعرض عن هذا, turn away or ignore this. Who said that? Most of the mufassirin, the people of tafsir, they said it's the husband of the woman, and some said it's the witness. So Allah knows best, but the majority said that it's the husband of the woman. He said to him, Yusuf, called him with his name, أعرض عن هذا. He said that after the matter was very clear to him that Yusuf is innocent. This is not something that a person would say to someone that is accused and truthfully accused that he is causing harm to his wife. So after knowing and seeing that Yusuf alayhi salam was innocent from this crime, and it's his wife is the one that plotted this, he said to him, أعرض عن هذا, turn away from this, ignore this. And the meaning of that is that as if nothing happened. Do not talk to anyone about it. This is a huge issue. This is something that caused so much, harm to the family, someone of status like him, something for his honor and dignity when it comes to his wife and family. So don't say that to anyone. Ignore the matter. Turn away from it. And that's what it means, Yusufu أعرض عن هذا. And there's no any threat of punishment to Yusuf alayhi salam because he's innocent. And some said it's something that shows the goodness of the person, that he knew the reality of it. So he said something like this, as it's mentioned to Yusuf alayhi salam, أعرض عن هذا, turn away from it, ignore it, overlook it. And then he said to her, وَاسْتَغْفِرِي لِذَنْبِكِ, and seek forgiveness for your sin. وَاسْتَغْفِرِي لِذَنْبِكِ إِنَّكِ كُنْتِ مِنَ الْخَاطِئِينَ, indeed you were among the wrongdoers, the sinful ones. This is what he said to her because of, again, the matter becomes very clear, and the evidence is very clear that that she had plotted this against Yusuf alayhi salam. When people say, and the reason I'm mentioning this because sometimes people might read in the books of tafsir talking more in details about the husband of the woman of Al-Aziz, of maybe that he is a wise person and that's what he said, or maybe that he has some weakness or his jealousy with regards to his wife is weak, not normal, when a person would say that in some situations like that, and some others, said other things. But when a person, imagine the situation here, that he saw his own wife in such a state, and the evidence are clearly directing her to be the sinful one, and Yusuf alayhi salam is the innocent one. So this is what he said to him and he said to her, that for Yusuf alayhi salam to turn away from that and to seek forgiveness for your sin, that means he's not going to punish her, and indeed that she is among the sinful one. And then as we would see, the story would unfold into more details and what's going to happen to Yusuf alayhi salam, and that eventually they would get him to be in prison. But the great lessons that we learn from this, but before we get into the lessons, when we look at these verses and how the details mentioned in the verses and these specific and physical matters that are explained in these verses as if a person is witnessing it with his own eyes, and how Yusuf alayhi salam to show that he is such a person of honor and dignity and goodness and truthfulness, all kinds of manners, and this is a surah that we can learn so many different good manners from it. But looking into some of the words, when it says wastabaqa, that means they're racing both to the door, and the word qaddat, which means torn, qamisahu, his shirt, min dubur, and the word dubur is the end or the back of things. And this is something like, for example, when you talk about the dubur of the salah, the end of the salah, where the dua is a virtuous thing for a person to do. Is it after the salah or at the end of the salah? We know for sure that the dua at the end of the salah before the salam is a virtuous thing. So it's all because of the differences of opinions of what the meaning of dubur. Is it the end of the thing itself, or at the end of it, meaning after it? So the end or the back of the shirt. And the evil sense of some of the human beings and how they can change immediately, and they would hide their emotions so that they're not exposed or that people do not see the reality of their evil, and how she said what she said, and enticing from her husband the ghayra or the jealousy, so that he would act against Yusuf alayhi salam and not against her. And that's what she said, قالت ما جزاء من أراد بأهلك سوءا. What is the recompense? Al-jaza is the recompense of the one that arad, he intended. And that means she's, in a sense, she said something that doesn't accuse Yusuf alayhi salam directly. It's only intended, that he intended to do evil to his wife or to his family. And she even suggesting, because of her status, and her husband is of status, that either to be imprisoned or to have a painful punishment. And prison is something that has been part of the punishment from a long time ago, and this is something that is mentioned in the story of Musa alayhi salam and others. So this is what they used to sometimes, or most of the time, they would imprison people indefinitely like this, or physical punishment as a result of that. And as it will come later, that she threatened Yusuf alayhi salam that she would humiliate him and that she would put him in prison. All of that to cause Yusuf alayhi salam to fall weak, so that he would act according to what she asked him to do by disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the struggle, and this is the fitna, and these are the plots. And when a person is faced with human beings that are trying to plot against him, many people, they disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of the fear of another human being. And some people, one punishment or the other can be more severe. Like, for example, if someone that is honored, someone that has honor and dignity, the worst thing that happened to him is to be humiliated. Someone else doesn't really care, but he cares about his own physical being, being beaten or being tortured. This is far worse than anything else, and so on. But the people of wisdom, the people of righteousness, the people, those who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala perfected their way of thinking and their intellect and their iman, they're not trapped into the immediate sense of things. They see that everything is by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they look at the outcome of things. And when a person saves his honor and dignity, this is far more important than to be deprived from some form of a desire in this life. So this is the threat, or this is what she suggested. And Yusuf alayhi salam, as mentioned, that he was, till that point, he is even protecting her honor and dignity by concealing her fault and his weakness, and her weakness. But when she said what she said, then he had to prove his innocency, that he claimed clearly, or he mentioned clearly, that she is the one that's trying to seduce him. Which also brings an important point here, is that a believer, even though he rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he knows that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he is seeing him, but there's nothing wrong with making it very clear to the people the truth. And for example, in this case, that he's pushing away from him any accusation of evil, and this is absolutely the proper way, and that's to protect one's honor and dignity, and it's all part of the means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created. A shahid, or the witness, which has many different rulings to it, but one of which is a person should only witness with what he sees with his own eyes. Only what he sees with his own eyes, not something else, not to analyze something, but rather to see with his own eyes. But here in this case, the shahid, or the witness, he just explained something that is very clear, as they see clearly with their own eyes, and it means by necessity what has been mentioned. So if the shirt is torn from the back, that means she's the one that did that. And if the shirt is torn from the front, that means he did it. And whoever torn the shirt, that means he's the one that is in fault. And in that case, it's the wife of Al-Aziz. And Al-Kadhib wa-Sidq, both are mentioned in these verses. Lying and truthfulness. And how easy it is for people to lie. Especially when a person is faced with a situation like this. Most people, they would lie. If someone is faced with punishment, that he's going to go through some severe punishment, the immediate thing that people would refer to is lying to defend themselves. And they would justify that lying for themselves so that they're not falling into any form of accusation, even if it's true. But the one that is truthful, he would prevent himself from falling into the mistake to start with, so that he does not fall into lying. So this is a great lesson, even though we're rushing into the lessons and the benefits. But the truthful ones, one of the benefits of the truth is that the person is protected from early on, so that he does not plot or plan evil, so that if he is exposed or asked to witness or something of that nature, he would not lie, because he hates lying so much. And in that case, he would say the truth. That means he would accuse himself. So one of the benefits of that is that a person would stay away from doing wrong deeds. Why? Because he's always going to be truthful. The witness, or the husband of the woman, when they mention clearly that this is the kaid, or the plot of the women in general, that this is something that they're good at, and making or putting things in the proper perspective, it's a lesson for the men and women. For the women is to avoid these types of plots. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us with certain things inside of us. Whether it's a person tend to lie to protect himself, or plotting something using certain qualities that a person has to plot to bring some benefit to oneself. This is all not permissible. And at the same time, a person should be aware of that, so that he's not deceived by the plots of others. So a person should be alert not to be deceived by the plots of others. And this is something that is also to be addressed by the men, as he knew, as her husband, he knew that this is a great plot, or they have plot, and their plots can affect severely to the people. And then he ordered Yusuf alayhi salam to turn away from this, and for her to seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or forgiveness from her husband, because indeed she's among the sinful ones, as she did this evil act. We'll continue inshallah ta'ala after the break, and just mentioning the clear benefits that we learn from these verses, but right after the break, so stay with us inshallah.
Muhammadur Rasulullah, Muhammadur Rasulullah.
Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. Welcome back. And with verses in Surah Yusuf number 25 to 29 and the lessons learned, one of the great lessons that we learned from this and the entire surah is that the help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the help from Allah when it comes to the person in a subtle way, in a hidden way, it comes as a result of the goodness of the person. So if someone wants to receive the help from Allah, even in the most difficult situations, then he should first be obedient to Allah and be steadfast upon the deen of Allah. Then the great help will come to him from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in ways that a person would never expect. And this is part of the meaning of the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Al-Latif, which is going to be mentioned in the surah by the way. Inna Rabbi latifun lima yasha. This is what Yusuf alayhi salam will say at the end of the surah, that my Lord is latifun lima yasha. Latif, that means the most subtle. To whatever He wills, subhanahu wa ta'ala, He make the matter very clear, but it's hidden from the people till they see the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala established in their own eyes. So the meaning of which is, when we're reading these verses, in this context of the verses, when Yusuf alayhi salam is facing the plot of the wife of Al-Aziz, are we seeing from this what happened at the end of the story, or at the end of the surah, of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made Yusuf alayhi salam established on the land of Egypt? Do we see the relationship? There is a relationship. This is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took Yusuf alayhi salam from the very beginning. He's preparing him for that end of, or what's mentioned at the end of the surah. And these are all means to establish what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will, in a hidden way. So no one, if a person is just looking at this, when Yusuf alayhi salam was in the well, he would never imagine that being in the well, it's a preparation for Yusuf alayhi salam to be in charge of the land of Egypt. And the same thing with the situation here, when he's accused and when he is proven his being innocent in this plot against him. Right? This is all means to strengthen Yusuf alayhi salam, to prepare Yusuf alayhi salam, ways for Yusuf alayhi salam to see the ways of people. He's being tested by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that extracts from Yusuf alayhi salam the best manners, the truthfulness. So witnessing the lutf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He helps someone in a hidden way from the person, the person doesn't see it happening, but it's all by the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is something that we need to witness throughout the surah, from one verse to the other, even in this very specific details. It happened this way for that specific way, so that the matter would unfold the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will for it. So for example, if she was the one that would beat Yusuf and running to the door, maybe things would have been different, right? Or the other way around. This is again according to the plan that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prepared. One of the great lesson also, that the lessons that we learned from this, even though it's not direct, this is, nations before, this is how their affairs and their environment, as it's mentioned before, our homes, and to protect our homes from haram and from falling into these types of sins. And that is to have that separation between men and women. And the women, they need to be with their maharim and to protect their honor and dignity, as the way of the Prophet ﷺ, and not to be at ease with relatives, with people that are close, because as we know that human nature, we are weak by nature. This is how we are. And even as Yusuf alayhi salam, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him that strength and that iman, he still turned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, seeking help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. And he made it clear, as it's going to be mentioned in the next set of verses, that if it's not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will protect him from their plots. Yusuf alayhi salam said about himself, Asbu ilayhin, that I would fall into their plans and their plots, because of the weakness of the human beings. So nobody is to praise himself in such a way to say that even if there is a mixed environment or things like this and men and women are together, I'm in control of myself, I have strong iman, I am steadfast upon the deen of Allah. This is a wrong way of praising oneself. And when a person says this is a sign that the person is lying. Because if Yusuf alayhi salam, and he is someone that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose him, he would say what he says, and this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected him. How can any other person praise himself in such a way? It's not praising oneself, it's actually lying about how human beings are. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, and that's why when a person is alone is different than when he is among people. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honored Yusuf alayhi salam. So to protect our households, our families, our wives and daughters and so on, to wear the proper hijab, to have the attitude of goodness, not to be like the woman of the wife of Al-Aziz, and to be patient with the orders of Allah. And that's the most valuable thing for a woman in this life after her iman and faith and the belief in Allah and her salah and so on, is her chastity, is her shyness, is her goodness, as it's clearly mentioned in many evidences in the Qur'an and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And she gets so much rewards as a result of this. And the woman that came to the Prophet ﷺ and basically complaining that men, maybe they would get more rewards than women because they go to the masjid and they make salah, they make hajj and umrah, and they make jihad with the Prophet ﷺ, and the women at home serving the men and so on. And the Prophet ﷺ, when he said to her that to inform the women that she being a good wife to her husband and being obedient to him in al-ma'ruf would give her all of these rewards that the men would have to go out of the house and do all kinds of things. And it doesn't, of course, prevent the woman from going outside, but in the proper way. So, and it's all about what? It's about protecting one's honor and dignity. And that huge, the free mixing that people have without any limits whatsoever that can lead to evil things. And if it doesn't lead to evil things to some people, it's still the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that needs to be observed. One of the benefits also to be learned from this is that protecting oneself or defending one's honor and dignity, it's a good thing. It's a permissible thing. And actually sometimes it's very important. As Yusuf alayhi salam, he protected his honor and dignity by saying, "Hiya rawdatni an nafsi." And this is not against relying upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Prophet ﷺ did the same thing when people were walking and they saw him walking with his wife Safiya radiallahu anha. So to protect these people from the shaitan whispering to them, and to also to prevent or to protect oneself and honor and dignity, he said to them that this is my wife Safiya. Which means what? A person should not put himself in a situation that people might accuse him of something. And don't say, as long as I'm innocent, I don't care what people think about me. This is not true. If you don't think about what people think of you if you're doing the right thing. But for someone to be, for example, walking with someone or a friend of someone that is known to be a thief, for example, you're bringing all kinds of accusation to yourself. So protect yourself and protect your honor and dignity. To be with people of bid'ah innovations, people that are upon deviant beliefs and things like this, and people see you in that state, people might accuse you of the same thing, right? It doesn't mean that it's forbidden if a person, for example, is enjoining good, forbidding evil, advising someone, being in the wrong places sometimes, a person protecting his honor and dignity by being away from the places where a person might be accused wrongfully, right, from doing wrong. There's a subject, of course, of evidences of things which is a valid thing to be used in the court of law, as it's mentioned here, witnesses saying things. But again, as we said, a witness, it is not permissible for the witness to witness saying or to testify except what he saw with his own eyes. And this is such a huge subject in the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one of the worst things that can ruin a person is shahadatul zur, is to wrongfully accuse someone or to witness something that a person didn't say, or to basically refer to the witness to someone else, or to say that this person told me, that person said this. Rather, something that has to be seen by one's eyes, and this is how a person would testify. Again, as we said, that to an advice to both men and women, but for the women to be away from backbiting, from plotting, from doing things that is against the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is definitely for both men and women to be upon, and for a person to be warned against plots by being truthful and upright and upfront, and to say things the way they are, and to rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to have good expectations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is above all, and He is the unknower subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He knows what's in the hearts. And if the person worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with truthfulness, he would see amazing things in his life. But when someone's life is based on deception, based on plots, based on lying, he won't get anywhere. He would just go from one failure to the other. And the worst failure of all is to be disobedient to Allah, is to be away from the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. and also to understand things in the proper way. And when it comes to the word kaid again, when some people just came into my mind, when some people they even accused women that their kaid or their plots is far greater than the kaid of the shaitan, which is an evil statement. And they took the evidence that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about the shaitan, إِنَّ كَيْدَ الشَّيْطَانِ كَانَ ضَعِيفًا, that the kaid or the plots of the shaitan is weak. But it's weak when it's opposed by the believers and the steadfastness of the believers. The plots of shaitan are so weak because it's just whispers. And for the believers, they know the ways of the shaitan. So it's not to be compared with إِنَّ كَيْدَكُنَّ عَظِيمٌ. This is two different contexts. So إِنَّ كَيْدَكُنَّ عَظِيمٌ, when it comes to men versus women, yes, this is greater than the ways of men. Women, they have their ways, right, different than the ways of men. So this is how to put things in the proper context, and this is how people, they take things out of context. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us benefit from this, and to make us among those who have the best manners when they're faced with all kinds of trials and circumstances. And we'll continue inshallah ta'ala with the next set of verses next time. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
إلا الذين تابوا وأصلحوا وبينوا فأولئك أتوب عليهم وأنا التواب الرحيم.
فادعوا الله مخلصين له الدين ولو كره الكافرون.
يا زكريا إنا نبشرك بغلام.
يا أيها النبي إنا أرسلناك شاهدا ومبشرا ونذيرا